My sister raised her glass and said, "Cheers to the Wilsons, except for Emily, the failure of the family who only has money." My parents laughed, then I raised my glass and said, "To the failure who will stop paying for your wedding." Today, the house feels peaceful. The afternoon sun comes in through the window, painting a picture of peace I never thought possible. I breathe deeply, and the air doesn't burn my chest. But there was a time, not long ago, when the air in my own home, the nest that was supposed to be mine, suffocated me. It all started, or perhaps culminated, that night. I'm Elena. I'm 35 years old and, according to most of the outside world, I'm a successful woman. I have my own event planning company, one of those that plans weddings and quinceañeras that appear in magazines. I earn good money, have a nice apartment in a good area of Mexico City. But for my family, the Hernandez family, I was simply the failure. Why? Because in their eyes, at 35, I'm still single, childless, and fully dedicated to work, instead of having found a good match and formed a real family. What they conveniently forgot, or pretended to forget, was that this failure had been the financial pillar of the family for years. I paid for Lucy's, my younger sister's, college education because she had potential. I gave her the down payment for her first car because she needed independence. I covered Dad's expensive medical bills when we didn't have decent insurance. I remember that terrible night in the emergency room, when his chest pain had us all terrified. The hospital administrator approached me first, not my mother, with forms and payment questions. Even in that moment of fear, I was the one they identified as the financial support. I helped them pay debts that I never really understood how they incurred. Credit cards that mysteriously maxed out, loans I only learned about when they needed rescuing. I never questioned the reasons behind these financial emergencies. They were family, and family helps family. That was my mantra. I believed in family with a fervor that now embarrasses me. I believed that love meant sacrifice, that giving united you, that one day they would see my worth beyond my checkbook. I thought if I gave enough, sacrificed enough, they would finally acknowledge me. How naive I was. How desperately I clung to the fantasy of being valued, when all they saw was a convenient ATM with no withdrawal limits. Lucia and Michael's engagement dinner was the perfect setting for the final act of that family play. My parents' house was dazzling. Mom had spent weeks preparing, calling me almost daily for financial contributions. "Elena, we need to order the special chairs," she'd say. Or, "Elena, Miguel's family expects premium champagne, not the regular kind." Each call ended with a bank transfer notification on my phone. Mom had gone to great lengths, obsessed with making everything look perfect for Miguel's family, who are from good society. The kind of family my parents had always aspired to connect with, wealthy, traditional, with old money and older names. There were flowers everywhere, imported lilies and orchids I had paid for, arranged by the expensive florist Mom insisted was the only one acceptable. Candles flickered in crystal holders that had been purchased specifically for this occasion, with my credit card. And that unmistakable aroma of Mom's special paella wafted through the air, a recipe she had learned at the cooking class I had gifted her last Christmas, which she only made for grand occasions. The ingredients, of course, had been delivered earlier that day, charged to my account. The sound of laughter and conversations filled the dining room, creating a bubble of apparent happiness, a perfect facade that had cost me nearly 3 months' profit from my company. Everyone was there. Dad, with his new suit that I paid for, cutting the serrano ham like the proud patriarch he felt himself to be, giving out pats on the back and old jokes. Mom, elegant, serving wine with a tense smile, dropping hints about how difficult it was to organize everything. Uncles, cousins, admiring Lucia's ring, congratulating her effusively. And Lucia? Lucia was radiant, as always. My sister, the princess of the family. With her perfect smile, her impeccable hair, her boyfriend Miguel by her side, looking at her as if she were the sun. They talked about the wedding, the plans, the honeymoon, plans that I knew would, in large part, come out of my account. They had decided to go all out, the best venue, the most expensive catering, the trendy music band, and I, the failure, would bear the bill. I was sitting in a corner of the long table, trying to smile, nodding, answering superficial questions. I felt that usual pang in my stomach, that sensation of being physically present but emotionally absent. Like a paid guest in my own family story. Each compliment to Lucia, each mention of the wedding, was a reminder of my secondary role, that of the wealthy sister who sponsors but doesn't participate in real life. The underlying tension, invisible to Miguel and his family, but palpable to anyone who knew the Hernandez family, vibrated in the air. It was as if we all walked on eggshells smiling, knowing that at any moment something could break. And that night, it did. The time came for the formal toast. Dad cleared his throat and raised his glass, saying the expected words about happiness and the future. Then, it was Lucia's turn. She stood up, in her silk dress that I had also paid for, and raised her glass with that smile that could charm the devil. The dining room fell silent, expectant. And then, she said the words that burned into my soul like acid. Cheers to the Hernandez family. To our family. To successes, to the future, to love. Cheers to everyone. She paused, her gaze finding mine across the table, and her smile widened cruelly, except for Elena, of course. The failure of the family, who only has money. A momentary silence, tense, floated in the air. And then, the laughter. The laughter of my parents. A sharp, derisive laugh that sounded like breaking glass inside me. Mom let out a cackle and nodded, Dad chuckled and gave Lucia a pat on the arm. Some uncles laughed nervously, not fully understanding the cruelty, but following the family current. I felt like I was drowning. My chest tightened as if barbed wire had been wrapped around my lungs. Lucia's words weren't a joke, they were a public slap, validated by my own parents. In that instant, something inside me clicked. It wasn't just pain. It was an icy fury, a brutal clarity. I saw my entire history with them unfold before my eyes, the ignored sacrifices, the disguised contempt, the constant exploitation. Who only has money? That was my definition to them. Not my effort, not my professional success, not my unconditional support. Just the money I gave them. I lowered my glass, raised it again slowly. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice, when I spoke, was surprisingly firm, clear. It silenced all the laughter. And I said, my voice resonating in the now total silence of the dining room. I looked directly at Lucia, then at my parents, whose smiles had frozen on their faces. I toast to the failure. I paused, the tension was palpable. I could smell the incipient fear mixed with the aroma of paella and flowers. I finished my toast with a terrifying calm, to the failure who will stop paying for your wedding. The reaction was instantaneous. There were no laughs now. There was a sepulchral silence, broken only by the sound of someone coughing uncomfortably. My parents and Lucia's faces paled. Their eyes opened in disbelief, then in anger. Miguel looked completely lost. No one said anything. The atmosphere became dense, oppressive. The Hernandez family's perfect happiness bubble had popped into 1,000 pieces. I set the glass on the table carefully. I stood up. Everyone was looking at me. I could feel the weight of 100 eyes on me. The house where I grew up suddenly felt alien, every family photo on the wall seemed like an accusation. Excuse me, I said, my voice still low but firm. It seems I've lost my appetite. I left the dining room, the house, without looking back. The cold night air was a relief on my burning face. I got into my car and drove aimlessly for a while, Lucia's words and my parents' laughter repeating in my head like a cruel and endless echo. My chest was still tight, but beneath the pain, the rage grew, strong and clear. It wasn't just pain anymore. It was determination. I arrived at my apartment and collapsed on the sofa. The framed photos on my wall, pictures of family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, seemed to mock me now. In one of them, Lucia and I stood arm in arm at her college graduation, both smiling. I had been so proud that day, feeling I had helped her achieve something important. Now the photo felt like evidence of my own blind devotion to a family mythology I had created in my head. The tears came then, hot and bitter, streaming down my face and soaking the collar of my expensive blouse, another item I had purchased to impress my family at the dinner, to somehow prove I wasn't the failure they thought I was. I cried for the girl who always wanted her parents' approval, for the little Elena who would bring home perfect grades only to have them glanced at casually while Lucia's mediocre achievements were celebrated lavishly. I cried for the sister who believed in the blood tie, who defended Lucia against childhood bullies and later paid her debts without question. I cried for the woman who allowed herself to be used, who had measured her worth by how much she could give, how much she could endure. I cried for the humiliation, for the injustice, for years of invisible sacrifices. I cried until I had no tears left, until exhaustion left me empty. But in that emptiness, something new began to grow. A resolution cold and hard as diamond. I wasn't going to be the failure anymore. I wasn't going to be the wallet. I wasn't going to allow myself to be trampled. My failure in their eyes was my freedom for me. And my money, which they so despised when it came from me but wanted so much when it went to them, would become my tool. The phone started ringing. Messages. Calls. I ignored the first round. My phone vibrated incessantly throughout the night, lighting up the darkness of my bedroom every few minutes. By morning, I had 37 missed calls from my mother, 23 from Lucia, and a dozen from my father. The family WhatsApp group, usually dormant except when someone needed money, had exploded with messages, most directed at me, questioning my sanity, my loyalty, my basic decency. I knew what was coming, attempts to minimize it, to blame me, to manipulate me into walking back my statement and opening my wallet once more. I scrolled through the notifications without opening them, seeing just enough of each preview to understand their tactics. Elena, How could you say that? Everyone is shocked. Miguel's parents think we're dysfunctional now. Read one from Mom. What a shame you made us go through. Another message from Mom, sent at 3:14 a.m., likely after she'd had too much of the expensive wine I'd provided for the dinner. It was a joke. Elena, always so dramatic, came from Lucia, accompanied by eye-rolling emojis as if to underscore how unreasonable I was being. We need to talk, your attitude is unacceptable, from Dad, his message devoid of any acknowledgement that perhaps, just perhaps, it was their attitude that had finally become unacceptable to me. I deleted the messages without responding. I owed them nothing. Not an explanation, not an apology. The first thing I did the next day was call Sophie. Sophia is my best friend from college. She'd always told me, Elena, you don't owe them anything. You're building your life while they live off yours. Sophia, with her calm but firm voice, listened to my story. She showed no surprise. They did it, didn't they? I knew they would cross the line sooner or later. Her validation was like a bomb. It made me feel that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't overreacted. She gave me the first practical advice: document everything, Elena. Every transfer, every message, every email where they ask you for money. You need to have everything in writing. I spent the next few days immersed in account statements, old emails, WhatsApp conversations. My dining table disappeared under stacks of printed papers, highlighted sections glowing neon against the white background. Each document represented a moment when I had chosen family obligation over self-preservation. It was a painful journey through the past, a recount of every time I said yes when I should have said no, every time I transferred money without questioning the purpose, every time I accepted vague explanations because challenging them felt disloyal. Each transfer was a stab. 20,000 pesos for Lucia's tuition at that private university she insisted on attending, though she had scholarships for perfectly good public ones. 45,000 for the down payment on her European car, when a domestic model would have served her just fine. 80,000 for Dad's dental bills because he insisted on that celebrity dentist who treated telenovela stars. 150,000 for the family trip to Cancun where I had a room to myself but somehow ended up paying for everyone's accommodations, meals, and excursions. Looking at the bare numbers on the statements, without the emotional manipulation that typically accompanied the requests, was illuminating. And devastating. Seeing the figures together was overwhelming. Column after column of outgoing transfers, each described with a quick, clinical bank label that stripped away the guilt and obligation that had prompted them. Transfer to L. Wilson. Payment, hospital services. Deposit, travel agency. The totals at the bottom of each page grew increasingly alarming as I worked backward through years of financial records. It was a huge amount of money, a significant part of what I had earned with so much effort over the years. And it was during this excavation into the past that I found something that froze my blood. I was looking for old emails from my parents about college expenses and came across a chain of emails from about 10 years ago between Mom, Dad, and a lawyer. They were talking about the distribution of Grandma Carol's assets. My maternal grandmother had passed away when I was young, and they always told me she hadn't left almost anything. But in these emails, there was mention of a small property in a town in Jalisco and a sum of money that Grandma Carmen specifically wanted to leave to me, for my future and my education. The total wasn't a fortune, but it was a considerable amount at that time, more than enough for my college tuition. The emails detailed how Dad and Mom could quickly sell the property and redirect the money and the cash to cover some urgent debts of theirs, justifying that I was still young and didn't need that burden. They made sure I never found out. They had stolen my own inheritance. The discovery was devastating. It wasn't just that they had financially exploited me for years, extracting money with a combination of guilt, obligation, and manipulative gratitude. It was that they had lied to me and stolen something that was legitimately mine for a decade. Something my grandmother had specifically intended for me, not for their credit card bills or Dad's new business ventures that inevitably failed. I remembered how they had spoken about Grandma Carmen after her death. She was always frugal, your grandmother, Mom would say with a slight curl of her lip. Lived simply, died simply, left nothing but memories. And I had believed her. I had treasured those memories of Grandma's small kitchen filled with the scent of fresh bread, of her patient hands teaching me to embroider, of her quiet dignity that somehow never quite fit with the rest of the boisterous Hernandez family. Now I understood why. She had been different. She had seen through them, perhaps. And in her final act, she had tried to give me a foundation, a start that wasn't tied to their control. The initial rage transformed into an icy determination. I printed out these emails too, creating a separate file labeled Inheritance. I added notes, dates, calculations of what that sum, properly invested, might have grown to over the past decade. This wasn't just a matter of a wedding. This was no longer about Lucia's cruel toast or my parents' laughter. It was a pattern of deception and manipulation of a lifetime. The calls and messages from my parents became more insistent, then more aggressive. They demanded to know if I was serious about the wedding. Lucia sent me crying voice messages, saying I was ruining her dream. Dad threatened me with legal action if I didn't fulfill our agreements. Mom was getting sick because of me. It was then that I decided I needed professional help. Following Sophia's advice and a colleague's reference, I contacted a lawyer specializing in family and civil law, Attorney Roberts. I told her my story, showed her the documentation I had gathered, and, with a tight heart, showed her the emails about my grandmother's inheritance. Attorney Robles, a middle-aged woman with a penetrating but kind look, listened attentively. She confirmed what I feared: I had a case. Not only to protect myself from their threats about the wedding, but to claim my part of the stolen inheritance, and perhaps even compensation for years of unjust enrichment, if we could prove that my support was involuntary, but a product of manipulation. Elena, she told me, you have been a victim of financial and emotional abuse for years. What you did when you raised your glass was an act of legitimate defense. Her words gave me immense strength. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a strategist by my side. Following Attorney Robles' advice, I sent a formal letter to my parents and Lucia. I spent hours drafting it with the lawyer, choosing each word carefully. We decided on heavy cream stationery with my company's letterhead, a reminder of my professional success that they so easily dismissed. The letter arrived by certified mail, requiring a signature for delivery. I later learned from a sympathetic cousin that my mother's hand trembled as she signed for it, perhaps already sensing that this wasn't a typical communication from her dependable daughter. A cold and direct letter. Not emotional, not pleading, factual and resolute, with the steady voice of someone who has awakened from a long spell of manipulation. It notified that I was withdrawing my financial support for the wedding, detailed the history of my past contributions with exact figures and dates, and mentioned, in passing, that I was aware of the situation with my grandmother's inheritance, and that I would seek legal advice to recover it. Attorney Robles had suggested this approach, not leading with the inheritance issue, but including it as an aside, a warning shot across their bow. The letter wasn't a threat, it was a declaration of independence and facts. Sending that letter unleashed the real earthquake. The Hernandez family's reaction wasn't one of negotiation or understanding. It was unleashed fury, a storm of rage that confirmed everything Attorney Robles had warned me about. When people are accustomed to controlling you, she had said during one of our meetings, her eyes serious behind stylish glasses, they react with disproportionate anger when that control is threatened. Prepare yourself. Despite her warning, the intensity of their response shocked me. Within hours of receiving the letter, the attacks began. Threats by phone, my father calling my office line repeatedly until my assistant, alarmed, asked if she should block the number. You don't know what you're doing, he growled during the one call I answered, his voice slurring slightly, suggesting he'd been drinking. You'll regret this, Elena. Family is everything. Without us, you're nothing. Text messages full of insults flooded my phone. My mother, usually so careful about appearances, sent paragraph after paragraph of vitriol, questioning everything from my mental stability to my moral character. No wonder you're alone, one message read. Who could love someone so cold and ungrateful? Lucia alternated between tearful pleas and vicious attacks, sometimes within the same message. How can you do this to me? Followed immediately by you've always been jealous of me, of what I have that you couldn't get. Elena has gone crazy, the money has gone to her head, she wants to ruin her own family. It was painful. Each lie, each stab in the back, felt like salt in the wound. Some relatives I appreciated started to distance themselves. Mutual friends looked at me strangely. I felt that my reputation, so arduously earned, was being attacked by those who should protect me. And then came the second blow, the one that almost knocked me out. I received a message from Laura. Laura is my first cousin, almost my age. We were always a bit close, confidants at family gatherings, complaining together about the uncle's craziness and family pressure. I thought she would understand me, that she would be on my side. I had broadly told her what was happening. She sent me a message, supposedly of support, asking for details. Naively, I told her more. I sent her screenshots of some of my parents' messages, venting about my pain. A couple of days later, I received a furious call from my Uncle Carl, Laura's dad. He yelled at me, repeating the lies my parents had been saying, adding insults. He mentioned things I had only told Laura. My heart sank. Laura had betrayed me. She had forwarded my messages, my vulnerable confessions, to her parents so they could pass them on to mine or use them against me. It was the second stab, but this time, it came from someone who had approached pretending to be an ally. That was my lowest point. Between the threats, the defamation, Laura's betrayal, and the weight of years of pain, I felt like I was drowning again. Was all this worth it? Confronting my own blood? I locked myself in my apartment, not wanting to see anyone. The voices of my family, old and new, resonated in my head. Failure, selfish, crazy. But in the midst of darkness, I remembered Attorney Roble's voice, I remembered the indignation over the stolen inheritance, I remembered my parents' laughter at dinner. I remembered why I had started all this, not for revenge, but to recover my dignity, my self-respect, my life. I wasn't going to let them defeat me. I got up. I wiped away my tears. I contacted Attorney Robles. I told her about Laura. She wasn't surprised. In these cases, family loyalty can be blind and cruel. She advised me on the next step. It was time for a direct confrontation, with evidence and, if possible, with witnesses who couldn't be so easily manipulated. The opportunity came unexpectedly. My great-aunt Carmen, an elderly and respected woman in the family, organized a meal. They hadn't formally invited me, but my great-aunt called me aside and said, "Elena, I know there are problems. Come to eat. I need to understand what's happening. And your parents will be there too." It was a potential trap, but also an opportunity. I decided to go. Not alone. I asked Sophia to accompany me, not as a participant, but as my partner for the meal, someone who would simply be there and observe. Also, on Attorney Robles' advice, I took a small folder with the most compelling evidence, the key bank transfers, copies of the emails about the inheritance, and a couple of the most offensive messages from my parents and Lucia. The meal at my great-aunt's house was tense from the beginning. My parents and Lucia were there, smiling stiffly. They looked at me with resentment. The atmosphere was oppressive, loaded with uncomfortable silences and forced conversations about trivial topics. My great-aunt, insightful, tried to smooth things over, but the hostility was palpable. After eating, my great-aunt, with her quiet authority, said, "Well, now that we've eaten, I think it's time we clear things up, don't you think? Lucia, here we're not to fight, but to understand." My parents took the floor first. They repeated their version of events. I was ungrateful, selfish, unbalanced, wanted to ruin Lucia's wedding out of pure malice. Lucia added pitiful comments about how much it hurts that my own sister is doing this to me. It was a coordinated attack, full of falsehoods and self-pity. I felt the bile rise in my throat, but I remained serene. Sophia, sitting beside me, discreetly squeezed my hand. When they finished, my great-aunt looked at me. "Elena, what do you have to say to this?" I took a deep breath. I looked at my parents, at Lucia. The icy rage gave me strength. "I've brought some things," I said, taking out the folder. "Not to fight, as Aunt Carmen says, but to show the truth. The truth of why I reached the point of not wanting to pay for one more wedding," I began. With a clear and firm voice, although my heart was beating hard against my ribs and my mouth had gone completely dry, I spoke of years of financial support. Each word felt like it was being pulled from somewhere deep inside me, from that place where I had buried all the resentment, all the hurt, all the silent fury of being used while being belittled. My voice, surprisingly, didn't waver as I laid out the facts of my exploitation. "You say I only have money," I said, looking at Lucia, whose perfect makeup couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, evidence of the strain the last few weeks had put on her. Her engagement ring glinted on her finger, a 3-carat diamond. I suspected she was already calculating how to keep even if the wedding fell through. But that money is the result of my effort. My early mornings and late nights building a business from nothing. No connections, no inheritance, just work. An effort that I used to pay for your college. I took out copies of the transfers and put them on the low table, the papers making a soft but definitive sound as they landed on the polished wood. Years of transactions, nearly 500,000 pesos in total just for her education. To help you with your car, I pulled out more receipts. To cover Dad's unexpected expenses, more documents. Miguel's family, who was present, began to look uncomfortable. Some Hernandez relatives looked on in disbelief. Then, I went for the strongest blow. "And about saying that I'm ruining my family," I said, my voice breaking slightly from the pain, but firm. "You, Mom, and Dad, robbed me. You stole my inheritance." I took out the copies of the emails from 10 years ago about Grandma Carmen's inheritance. I handed them to my great-aunt first, then offered copies to other relatives present. Grandma Carmen, my voice grew stronger, looking at my great-aunt, wanted this money to be for my education, for my future. "You took it. You lied to me for 10 years. My parents' faces were a study in terror and fury. Mom was babbling denials, Dad was trying to snatch the papers from the table. Lucia was open-mouthed. And then, the decisive moment occurred, the one I didn't quite expect. My great-aunt Carmen, after reading the emails, looked up with eyes full of sadness and disappointment, and looked at her nephews. "It's true," she said, her voice clear and serene, but with a weight of authority that no one could ignore. "I knew Carmen wanted to leave something to Elena. I asked years ago, and they told me that things had become complicated and that it hadn't been possible. I didn't know they had done this." Her testimony, an impartial and respected person, was the final validation. The scene became chaotic. My parents yelled at my great aunt and me, denying everything despite the evidence. Lucia began to cry hysterically, accusing me of ruining everything. The Hernandez family's respectable family mask shattered in front of several witnesses. There was no remorse in their eyes, only rage because their deception had been exposed. I stood up again. I have nothing more to say. The evidence speaks for itself. I looked at my parents and Lucia one last time. I hope you find a way to finance your wedding, Lucia. And you, I looked at my parents, prepare to hear from my lawyer about Grandma Carmen's inheritance. I left my great aunt's house with Sophia by my side. The afternoon air felt fresh, purifying. I had trembled, I had felt fear, but in the end, I stood firm. I had told my truth and had shown the evidence. The moment of justice wasn't in a court, but in a great aunt's dining room, in front of relatives. It was enough. The consequences for the Hernandez family were immediate and painful. Lucia's wedding was cancelled. Miguel's family, upon learning of the scandal, broke off the engagement. The news spread like wildfire in the family circle. Some relatives were outraged, others simply stayed away from my parents. Their reputation took a considerable hit. They were no longer the perfect and united family they pretended to be. The money and status they valued so much were affected. They had to sell the small property they had stolen to be able to start paying debts and avoid greater legal problems over the inheritance. My path wasn't easy after that. Moving forward after such a profound family rupture never is. The Hernandez family didn't disappear from my life overnight, like closing a door on a bad dream. The ties of blood, of shared history, of childhood memories, they stretch and strain but rarely break cleanly. They continued trying to contact me, sometimes with veiled threats about what they might tell mutual friends or business connections, sometimes with guilt trips disguised as concern for my well-being. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof because of this, my mother wrote in an email 3 weeks after the confrontation. If anything happens to him, I hope you can live with yourself. My father, whose medical care I had financed for years, apparently had no qualms about weaponizing his health against me once more. Lucia's approach changed over time. Her initial rage gave way to calculated attempts at reconciliation that always, without fail, circled back to financial requests. I miss you, sis, began one message, only to end with "and I found this perfect small venue that would only cost half of what we were planning before." The transparency of her manipulation was almost laughable, if it weren't so deeply sad. My lawyer took care of sending them formal communications, establishing clear boundaries. I had to learn to say no and not feel guilty. The attacks on social media decreased when some relatives began to defend my version or simply ask for the gossip to stop. The healing process was long. The pain from the betrayal doesn't completely disappear, it transforms. I had to mourn the family I idealized, the one that never really existed. I understood that blood ties don't guarantee love, respect, or loyalty. I had to forgive myself for having allowed them to treat me that way for so long, for having those blind spots, out of love or need for approval. I found my true family elsewhere. In Sophia, whose unwavering friendship was my anchor. In my great aunt Carmen, who showed me that integrity exists. In colleagues and friends who supported me. I built relationships based on mutual respect, honesty, and unconditional support, things I never had in my original home. I learned the invaluable value of personal boundaries. Setting boundaries isn't rejecting people, it's protecting oneself. It's a fundamental act of self-respect. Recovering a part of my grandmother's inheritance was less about the money and more about the principle, about the validation that they had robbed me. It was a small legal victory that closed a chapter. Today, 3 years after that dinner, I live in peace. My apartment has been redecorated, all traces of the Hernandez family aesthetic removed and replaced with colors and textures that bring me joy. The family photos once prominently displayed are now stored in a box in my closet, not thrown away, but no longer defining my space. I've created a sanctuary that reflects the woman I've become, not the daughter I was trained to be. My business thrives beyond what I could have imagined. Without the constant drain of supporting my family's lifestyle, I've been able to reinvest in my company, expand our services, and hire talented staff who share my vision. We now handle events for international clients, and last year a prestigious magazine featured our work on their cover, an achievement that went unacknowledged by the Hernandez family, but was celebrated with champagne and dancing by the people who truly value me. I have healthy relationships now, friendships and romantic connections built on mutual respect rather than obligation. I've even started dating someone, a kind, successful architect who sees my independence as a strength, not a failure. He understands my boundaries around money and family, having navigated his own complex family history. With him, I'm learning what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I still feel a pang of sadness sometimes, thinking about what could have been, but that sadness is small compared to the freedom I gained. I'm not the failure. I'm a survivor. I'm resilient. I'm the owner of my life and my dignity. The Hernandez family story is a warning, I believe. A sample of how greed, control, and lack of real love can destroy ties that are supposed to be unbreakable. My story is a reminder that sometimes, to find oneself, one must have the courage to separate from those who sink us, no matter who they are. True family isn't always one of blood, it's the one you choose, the one that respects you, the one that loves you for who you are, not for what you have or what you do for them. Looking back, I don't regret raising that glass. It was the act that freed me. The price was high, yes, but freedom is priceless. Thank you, from the heart, for having accompanied me this far. I would really like to know what you felt when hearing my story. Did it resonate with you in any way? Have you ever experienced a similar situation with your family? Share your thoughts and emotions in the comments. I read everything.